Hello viewers, I am going to present before you today the modules Public Policy Formulation, Official and Non-official Participants. In this chapter, an attempt is made to examine non-officials who bring influences and power to bring on those who are vested with the power of policy making: legislature, cabinet, individual citizen, electorate and policy agenda, the media, political parties, civil society organizations, pressure groups. Starting with the introduction, policy making is an extremely difficult process which involves the interaction of a complex set of forces. It generally begins with the ideas citizens or civil society organizations, that is, non-officials who do not hold office within the government structure, have about the actions they want the government to take. In other words, social groups and organizations bring influence to bear on those entitled to take decisions on some perceived problems. This interaction between the non-officials, that is civil society organizations and other actors, and the officials, that is policy makers in the government structure, involves power, influence and conflict in which both compete to impose decisions on dissenters. Public policy making is the principal function of the state. Since its formulation is a complex and dynamic process, no theoretical model is adequate to explain the policy formulation totally. According to Yeheskel-Dror, public policy making is a complex, dynamic process whose components make different contributions to it. It decides major guidelines for action directed at the future, mainly by the governmental organs. These guidelines or policies formally aim at achieving what is in the public interest by the best possible means. Public policy can be authoritative allocation of values by the political system, a slight variation from the previous or existing policy equilibrium reached out of the competing group struggle, a rational choice or the preference of the governing elite. It can also be a combination of these processes. In policy formulation, various agencies participate directly or indirectly. The role of the governmental agencies is direct, while the role of the non-governmental agencies is indirect. Some of the agencies which take part in policy formulation are legislature, cabinet, state governments, civil servants, judiciary, boards and commissions, mass media, political parties, pressure groups and public. It is essential to examine the role of these agencies in the formulation of policies in India. Coming to the role of legislature, in a democratic form of government, the role of legislature as the prime policy making body is significant. Since it is the representative body, it deliberates on various issues and formulates the policies. Yet, it is now widely accepted that the power of the legislature is more real in a constitutional sense than in terms of practical politics. Legislatures in the 20th century have declined in power in relation to the executive, despite the fact that they still have many functions. It is now regarded as a constitutional procedural device for legitimizing the policies and decisions of government rather than as an independent policy making unit. The members of the ruling party, having the majority, push through various policy initiatives which are formulated by the cabinet, having planned within the respective ministries after consultation with affected interests or concerned communities. It is observed that there is a high level centralization of policy initiative and policy making, at least so far as major policy initiatives are concerned, and what is more nearly, all the functionaries and institutions involved in policy making have implicitly accepted the role of the Prime Minister. Coming to the role of Cabinet, in a democratic form of government, it is the constitutional task of the Cabinet to decide the policies which are to be placed before the legislature for its sanction. Members of the Cabinet are the immediate and proximate policy makers. Within the Cabinet, it is said that the power of the Prime Minister in recent times has increased. It is also stated that the Prime Minister exerts strong influence over policy decisions if he has the majority support of members of the Union legislature. Same is the case with the Chief Minister at the state level. The Cabinet and the Cabinet committees play only an advisory and deliberative role, while the real decisions are taken by the Prime Minister himself. Coming to the role of state governments, in a federal polity, the union government and the state governments participate in policy making. The state governments formulate policies and make laws on items mentioned in the state and concurrent lists. At the state level, the state legislature and council of ministers under the leadership of the chief minister and other advisory bodies participate in the formulation of policies. However, in most of the federations, the role of the state governments has reduced to the minimum owing to various domestic and international political and economic factors. S. R. Maheshwari observed that since the financial resources are concentrated in the central government, the states have necessarily to look to the center for funds. It is axiomatic, according to the center's mode of thinking, that one who provides money also exercises control, and the states are thus made to look to the center more and more, especially since the adoption of the socio-economic planning in the 50s. Coming to the role of permanent boards and commissions. Various boards and commissions attached to different ministries like the Railway Boards, the University Grants Commission and the Union Public Service Commission assist the respective ministries or the Cabinet as a whole in policy formulation when public policy is not in its final stage. Next, coming to the role of ad hoc commissions or expert committees. Apart from boards and commissions which are permanent in nature, the government also constitutes ad hoc expert committees or commissions to seek recommendations regarding administrative reforms and policy initiatives. For example, in the field of education, the Government of India constituted the University Education Commission under the chairmanship of Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, the Secondary Education Commission under the chairmanship of Shri L. S. Mudaliar, and the India Education Commission under the chairmanship of Shri D. S. Kothari. The recommendations of these commissions in the field of education provided the basis for various policy initiatives by the government. Notable among the policy initiatives was the National Policy on Education of 1968. It was almost a precedent in the field of education to formulate the policies based on the recommendations of the commissions. The only exception is the formulation of National Policy on Education 1986, which was formulated after a public debate on the status paper Challenge of Education, a Policy Perspective 1985 by the government itself. Coming to the role of bureaucracy, public servants at the top management level assist the ministers in policy making. They are recruited in theory to send to the ministers by earning out their decisions. Yet, in reality, they exercise much more power in the making of public policies than the formal description of their responsibilities suggests. The administrator, who is concerned with the ends and not merely with the means, is called upon increasingly to provide the rational elements in policy process. The role of administrator in policy making is to clarify the choices open to politicians and to anticipate their consequences. The bureaucracy in the developing countries plays a dominant role in policy making. Administrators, both specialists as well as generalists, are part and parcel of various policy making bodies like the Union Home Ministry, the Niti Aayog, the UGC and other expert bodies. One can notice the fact that in case of formulation of the National Policy on Education 1986, also the bureaucracy played an important role because of the non-constitution of a full-fledged commission. It is noticed that policy in general is being increasingly made at the level of the Prime Minister's office. When the latter takes the initiative in an area, other bodies become merely ratification organs and many among them have been forced to remain idle as a result. Coming to the role of judiciary, the judiciary is also regarded as an important agency in the policy making process. In the United States and India, constitutions entitle the Supreme Courts to exercise judicial review. Policies in many areas have been influenced by judicial decisions. Coming to individual citizen as policy maker. The citizen is the center of object for policy analysis. The policy sciences should, as Laswell long ago hoped, function in such a way as to facilitate the interaction between the citizen and his problems. The issue is how citizens can make a real and meaningful input into the policy process. In our democracy, public opinion has an important role to play in policy formation. Public opinion is a source of public power that gives rise to demand and shapes the policy agenda of the political parties. In a representative democracy, it is assumed that power emerges from the people. Through legislature, the representatives of people frame laws and decide policies by a majority vote. Yet in practice, citizen participation in policy making is negligible. Many people do not seem to be exercising even their franchise or engaging in party politics. In politics, groups rather than individual citizens affect the way policy is made. A relatively small group of office holders may be responsible for actions they perform. It can safely be concluded that politics holds attractions for relatively few people. Neither the citizen nor the people are a particularly satisfactory force for analyzing political power. But it is a fact that no government, however dictatorial, can afford to go against the wishes and customs of the people. Therefore, the interests of people matter a lot. Coming to the role of public opinion. Democracy is defined as the government by public opinion. Popular response to government policies provides input in policy making. Public participation also helps in effective implementation of the policies. People's participation is a sine qua non for the success of government policies, which is even more so in the case of education. Since the public is not a homogeneous unit, the concerned public actually responds to the specific policy initiatives. Yehskell-Dror says that planning and policy making are closely interrelated. Planning is also a species of decision making and often overlaps policy making. Planning is a major means of policy making characterized by being relatively more structured, explicit and systematic, and by presuming to be more rational. With the advent of independence, the policy makers felt the necessity of accelerating socio-economic change and ensuring balanced economic development of different regions. The National Development Council, which approves the 5-year plans, provides representation to state governments and thus symbolizes the spirit of cooperative federalism. Coming to electorate and policy agenda. For the majority of voters, voting constitutes an important form of active political participation. In a way, their participation is being influenced by the policy agenda inside and outside government. Voters' choice shape our policy agenda in the following way. The formation of a policy issue, however, does not depend solely on a trigger. A link must be made between a trigger and a grievance or problem from the side of the public, which then transforms the issue into an agenda item. Citizens or interest groups make demands or claims on public officials, elected and non-elected, in the political system for action or inaction on some perceived problems. These demands constitute what is known as policy agenda. Policy agenda is therefore not to be interpreted as political demand. As Cobb and Elder point out that there are two types of agenda. First, the systematic or discussion agenda. Second, the institutional or governmental agenda. Coming to the systematic agenda, the systematic or discussion agenda consists of all issues that are commonly perceived by the members of the political community as meriting public attention and as involving matter within the legitimate jurisdiction of existing governmental authority. It may figure in the newspapers or in the academic studies highlighting the concerns of the people. Action on a perceived problem requires that the problem be brought to the notice of government institution which has the authority to take suitable action. Coming to governmental agenda, a governmental or institutional agenda consists of those issues to which public officials give serious attention. This sort of agenda may arise from policy decisions, Parliament's debate and executive decisions. In comparison to a systematic agenda, an institutional agenda is an action agenda which is more specific. Women's representation in Parliament and the proposal on abolition of Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, to cite a few examples, have been on the institutional agenda for a pretty long time. Old items, it is observed, and to receive priority from decision makers. Policy makers presume that older problems merit more attention because of their longevity and the greater familiarity officials have with them. Next, starting with the impact of media. The role of media in the policy agenda process is an important factor. In creating stereotypical threats, the mass media can shape the context within which policy response takes place and influence public opinion for setting a public agenda in terms of an incident or event. Further, the media bridge the information gap between the citizen and government. They communicate the information to the citizens about the decisions the governments have taken, and thereby media help to shape their reactions to each other's decisions. By publicizing specific issues, the media acts as the most important source of information for the government by reflecting the reactions of public to contemporary issues. Since the media act as channels of communication, it is important to determine whether they are politically biased in their presentation of information. If they are biased, they may distort the very concept of democracy because they may in such cases only serve to manipulate rather than illuminate social problems. Next is the role of political parties. Public opinion forms the basis for public policy. Political parties attempt to enhance the effect of public opinion when they make policy choice. As such, they have to be in the business of accommodating voters' preferences, which involves identifying what the voter qua policy consumer looks for and meeting it. In other words, competing parties, whether in or out of power, are in the business of shaping the preferences of voters. Like pressure groups, they serve as intermediaries between citizens and policy makers. Edmund Burke defines political party as a body of men united for promoting the national interest on some particular principles on which they are all agreed. Party platforms on which elections are contested form a basis for the party leadership when, as a government, it engages in the making of public policies. Political parties are regarded as important agents for establishing popular control over the government and public policies. They play an important role in reflecting the issues at stake and in setting goals for the society. Coming to the role of civil society organizations. Civil society as the space of association life has in the recent past acquired growing importance. Civil society associations are organizations with formal structure whose members share a common interest. They strive to influence the decisions of the government without attempting to occupy political offices. For individual citizens, the civil society is an important channel of communication. However, public opinion expressed by individual citizens does not always reflect any intensity for immediate action. It does not serve as the basis for a change in policy. Alex de Tocqueville, a French thinker of the 18th century, linked civil society to democracy. He noted that local associations of citizens are important constituents of the political system which limit the absolutist state. Civil society organizations have a vital input in policy making process. Although it is very difficult to predict the circumstances under which a civil society organization can expect to be useful in influencing the emergence of a public policy. Yet, it is possible to explain the role that the civil society organizations play in the policy process. Role of pressure groups. It is very difficult to predict the circumstances under which a pressure group can expect to be successful in influencing the emergence of the public policy. However, it is possible to explain the resources of pressure groups which make the legislators more effective in policy action. Firstly, the pressure groups have the expertise in the relevant subject matter. They shape the similar questions into larger issues worthy of legislative consideration. They may provide the policy makers with much technical data for and against a specific issue and information about the possible consequences of a policy proposal. Legislators find the expertise and data provided by pressure groups attractive because of their limitations and disinclination to accept the recommendations of the executive. The executive personnel also look to the pressure groups for information and opinions on policy issues. Secondly, the pressure groups have the funds and necessary resources for policy influence. They sometimes give or donate money to help to reselect the members of the parliament or the state legislature who had supported them on a disputed bill. Thirdly, the government has to rely on the pressure groups for the implementation of its policies. Many government programs would remain unimplemented without the cooperation of vested interests. Such interests can gain control in the formulation of policy as a price of its successful implementation. Fourthly, the successful groups are precisely those which have got access to different stages of policy making process. They are those which can influence the executive and its departments at the formulation stage before a bill is drafted. Fifthly, the influence of pressure groups is an important factor in the policy making process. The leaders of such groups usually belong to a higher socio-economic status than most of its members and are likely to place a higher priority on the stated political objectives of the groups. It is further pointed out that most members of a particular service or a labor group join their professional associations to receive the benefits from them. Pressure groups will not like to be politically branded. The main reason is that they have to protect their interests, irrespective of any particular party in power. Interest group politics represents something less than full politicization of groups and something more than utter depoliticization. Civil society organizations now form main channels through which influence is brought to bear on policy makers. They can communicate more effectively than individual citizens with public, elected and non-elected officials on policy issues, but they may not overtly reflect public opinion. The policy makers do not always appear to be content to follow the views and opinions expressed by the civil society groups. First, discuss the role of official and non-official participants in formation of public policy. Second, critically evaluate the role of civil society organizations in forming policy. Third, analyze the role of pressure groups in influencing policy formulation.